Good morning, good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. We are so thrilled to have you with us for our July Fundraising Academy webinar, Empowering Change, Community-Centric Fundraising in Action. As you're getting settled in our Zoom room, I welcome you to drop in the chat your name, which organization you're with, and where you are joining us from. Okay, we're going to jump in. Wonderful, there we go. Please share as you get settled in the Zoom room who you are and where you're joining us from. Oh, hi, Brian. It's good to see some good friends in the Zoom room today. Welcome, welcome, welcome. My name is Hannah Berger. I am a trainer with Fundraising Academy at National University, and I'm also the president and founder of the Philanthropy Coach, a nonprofit management fundraising consulting firm based out of Los Angeles, California, but serving nonprofit organizations all over the state and beyond. Thrilled to have all of you join us today for this, what promises to be both a, I hope, mind-opening and also joyful conversation all about community-centric fundraising. Go ahead and advance the slide there, Jesse. So we're going to jump right in and start by introducing our expert panelists. I encourage you to continue introducing yourselves in the chat as we move through this, but I want you to help me welcome Chantel Suarez Avila. Chantel is a dog mom, garden steward, nature adventurer, child to Mexican immigrants who learned all about organizing and power building growing up in Chicago. She's currently a resident of Escondido and founder of Más Allá. Más Allá, Spanish for beyond, is a community-centered, values-aligned fundraising consulting firm focused on closing funding gaps by raising revenue for and with women and Black, Indigenous people of color across the U.S. and practicing how to resource our communities through regenerative strategies. Más Allá provides its services nationwide and currently works with organizations in Illinois, Texas, and California. Thank you so much, Chantel, for being here today. Our next expert panelist is Jake Wild-Crea. He is an independent conflict resolution practitioner who helps improve how organizations do good in the world. He uses conflict management practices from the peace-building field to bring funder and nonprofit leaders together to build higher trust partnerships and increase the impact of philanthropic giving. He is also on faculty at the University of San Diego. Jake loves biking, surfing, climbing, dancing, and anything else that involves movement, growth, and relationships. Love that. Previously, he worked in nonprofit funder and intermediary roles as an associate director with Arabella Advisors. He also oversaw Loyola Marymount University's study abroad program in Argentina, worked in youth programming in Chicago, and engaged in disability advocacy in Minnesota. Welcome, Jake. And last but certainly not least on our expert panel is Claire Grubner. Claire is the Associate Director at Olivewood Gardens and Learning Center, where she has been part of the staff for 9 years after starting there as a volunteer. She oversees Olivewood's community-centric resource generation activities, supports communications, strategic planning and partnerships, staff development, and program development. She also engages in community advocacy and food systems work. Claire's love for people, nature, and food inspired her to get involved in the food justice and farm-to-table movements, and eventually with Olivewood Gardens. In her free time, you can find Claire hiking the trails of San Diego with her pup, dancing bachata and salsa, chopping it up in the kitchen, and connecting with friends and family over tasty food and drinks. Absolutely love that. Thank you so much, all of you, for being here today. Welcome, welcome. So we want to know a little bit about you, all of the participants that have joined us in the Zoom room. So let's start with this foundational question. How familiar are you with community-centric fundraising? take a beat to see what it looks like. Okay, we've got looks like we've got almost everyone participated. How familiar are you with community-centric fundraising? Okay, great. Can we share those results, Jesse? So it looks like we've got a few experts here today, which is exciting. And then a pretty good spread of where folks land in their continuum of understanding. So this will be a really great conversation. We've got about 30% of folks who are not at all familiar. So this will be your first introduction to community-centric fundraising. So with that in mind, I want to invite Claire to kick us off with an overview of what community-centric fundraising is.
Thank you, Hannah. Hello, everyone. It's really nice to be here with you today. Thanks for joining the convo. It's great to see kind of the breadth of understanding that folks have around community-centric fundraising, and we hope that today everybody leaves with a better understanding, curiosity, and really looking forward to continuing to learn and engage in this conversation. So I'd like to give a kind of a quick overview of community-centric fundraising and where it came from and what it means. CCF really came out of a conversation among many fundraisers around how we resource our work, and really looking at the different practices that have been kind of institutionalized in fundraising and philanthropy that in many ways have continued to perpetuate the same conditions that nonprofits are trying to alleviate or reverse. And so these practices can look like white saviorism, poverty tourism, pitting nonprofits against each other for resources. It can look at further marginalizing communities that are already experiencing a lot of inequities through the language that we use, through where funding goes, frequently towards larger organizations versus smaller organizations. And so Vu Le, if anyone's familiar with Nonprofit AF, he is a blog writer and nonprofit leader who's been writing for nearly a decade about just the nonprofit sector and really encouraging people to have a critical lens around how we're resourcing our work. And so in the kind of mid 2010s, he wrote an article around the different fundraising practices and philanthropic practices that he was experiencing, that fundraisers he was talking to were experiencing, that kind of felt misaligned with our work and our values. And so he and several Seattle nonprofit folks started to have conversations about, how do we change the current dynamics within our fundraising practices and the way that nonprofits and funders engage with each other. And so in 2019, this group kind of officially launched the community-centric fundraising concept and movement out of Seattle, really based on these 10 principles that are about recentering community rather than centering our donors. So it's about centering our community's needs and practicing values that are in alignment with our nonprofit values, and that really are reframing philanthropy from this concept of charity to a concept of justice, and that the work we're doing is really justice work. And so that's kind of how CCF came to be. And we're here in San Diego. I know that folks are from all over the place, which is super cool, but a really brief overview of the San Diego chapter. A few of us folks here, fundraisers in San Diego, had been having conversations. I was looking back in my emails. One of our leaders in San Diego, Ellie Brown of the San Diego Food System Alliance, we were chatting back in 2016 and 2017 about like, what's happening in this fundraising world. There were just some things that were coming up that felt kind of odd or like misaligned with with how we wanted to be doing work. And after several conversations in 2021, we gathered a group of fundraisers together to just start having a conversation around CCF, or community-centric fundraising, and what we might do in San Diego. And so fast forward to today, we have a robust chapter that's really developed our kind of values and our principles, and we're really looking at learning together, building community together, and acting together. And so one of those things that we do is try to help share CCF with the broader San Diego and national and beyond community. And so thanks for being a part of that journey.
That's great. Thank you so much, Claire. And could you walk us through the 10 principles as well, briefly?
Certainly, yes.
One more slide, Jesse. There we go. Perfect.
Beautiful. Thank you. So these are the 10 principles that we're practicing. So the first one is that fundraising must be grounded in race, equity, and social justice. So these are terms that are frequently not talked about in the fundraising sector, but are critical to the work that we're doing within our nonprofits. And we really need to be aligning our fundraising practices with that work that we're doing on the ground and through our programs. The second principle is that individual organizations' missions are not as important as the collective community. So some folks may have heard of like the nonprofit Hunger Games, where we frequently feel like we're pitted against each other for these limited resources. This is encouraging us to really think about how each of our organizations is a part of an ecosystem, and that the folks that we are serving are a part of this greater community. We're not solving problems alone as an organization. There are lots of other people, organizations, communities that are doing this work, and that we really need all of us to be resourced in order to create the changes that we're seeking. The third is that nonprofits are generous with and mutually supportive of one another. So that kind of builds on that same concept. That can look like seeking grants together. It can look like, uplifting each other's messaging, shouting out to each other in our fundraising campaigns. The fourth one is all who engage in strengthening the community are equally valued, whether volunteer, staff, donor, board member, community member. So that's really talking about how we're like acknowledging and how we're developing relationships with our community, and that all different types of giving are meaningful. For one person, $5 might have the same meaning as another person's $5,000, or one person's 10 hours a month might be the same as one person's 100 hours a month. And so really making sure that we're acknowledging that and uplifting different ways of giving. That kind of goes along with the fifth principle: time is valued equally as money. So really acknowledging that many of our nonprofits can't do our work without the time and talent of volunteers. The sixth one is we treat donors as partners, and this means that we are transparent and occasionally have difficult conversations. This is perhaps one of the most challenging ones. You know, we're frequently in these situations where there are different types of power dynamics going on, and we might not have the most power in the room. This is really encouraging us to be courageous and centering our community's needs over the discomfort of other folks, and really looking at how are we supporting people's growth as an individual. So it doesn't have to be we're being mean. It's about helping people to grow and really see the bigger picture of the issues that our communities are experiencing. The seventh is we foster a sense of belonging, not othering. So when we think about white saviorism and how the images that we're using, how we're speaking about our communities that maybe kind of perpetuate this perception that we're different, it's really about reframing our conversations, especially with donors. Number 8, we promote the understanding that everyone, donors, staff, funders, board members, volunteers, community members, personally benefit from engaging in the work of social justice. It's not just charity and compassion. So as I mentioned earlier, this is really about reframing this concept of charity, which is really kind of, feel good. Oh, I gave money and now all the problems are going to be solved. Look what I've done. To social justice, that we're in it for the long haul. And this is about righting historic wrongs so that our communities can thrive. Number 9, we see the work of social justice as holistic and transformative, not transactional. So that's really looking at our relationships with our community, whoever those folks may be, donors, volunteers, etc. That we're not saying, hey, I'm going to do this thing for you. Thanks for the money. See you next year. It's about how we're really building relationships with people. And that's, it's not just a means to an end. How we're doing the work is also apparent in the impact of the work. And then number 10 is we recognize that healing and liberation requires a commitment to economic justice. So I think about that a lot when I'm thinking about our internal organizational practices. If our people, can't pay for housing and, eat food and be thriving and well, we're not doing that work. So it's really about like how resources are distributed within our communities. So that's just a little overview of something where there's a lot more depth.
That was great. Thank you so much, Claire, for walking us all through that. So I have a list of questions that I'm planning to pose to our expert panel, but we want to make sure that everyone feels like you're a part of this conversation today. So I want to encourage everyone, drop your questions in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. You can also use the chat. And as the moderator today, I will do my best to keep up with all of those inquiries and make sure that your voices are heard. Before we jump into my questions, Jesse, if we go to the next screen, I'm curious from all of you. There we go. Which of these 10 principles that Claire just walked us through resonates with you most today? And this will help us, shape some of the conversation. So I really encourage you to select the one that just jumps right out at you, or something that you're personally having challenges with, or something you want to understand at a deeper level today. Give it just a couple more seconds. Thank you, Kelly. So Kelly says 2 and 4 stand out the most as impactful. So let's share these results. Okay. Let's see. We've got the looks like 6 and 4 and 1 and 2. So lots of options here. We will do our best in conversation to make sure that we touch on all of them. But I again encourage you, all of the participants, to drop questions as they come up for you while we're in conversation. And we will have additional time at the end of the panel to take just Q&A from the audience. Okay. So when I think about community-centric fundraising, I think that I learned of CCF through Vule, following Nonprofit AF. But before it was a concept that someone had beautifully named and created principles around, I came to a desire for greater focus on community, just being in the practice of being a professional fundraiser, right? I remember coming up through like very traditional sort of, what I call the Navy Blazer fundraiser training. And one of my early mentors told me that good professional fundraisers are like concierges. We make sure that whatever the donor wants, they get. Right. So lots of unlearning that I've been working my way through in recent years, and community-centric fundraising and the resources that I've been able to pull from and learn from there have been tremendously helpful. So I'm super curious what brought each of you to community-centric fundraising. And I'd like to invite Chantel to start us off by sharing your story.
Thanks, Hannah. No, yeah, I love what you just said about like having to relearn, right? Some of the practices. And I think that's similar to my story as well. I want to share first, though, I think for me, as you heard in my introduction, I grew up in Chicago. I'm Mexican American, and like many places across the US, we're still living sort of the like post effects of like racial segregation, segregation of all types, right? Like we're still living with the effects of these policies in the United States, right? And so for me, maybe similar to you, what did that mean? I lived in a very like Latino neighborhood next to a very Black neighborhood next to a very white neighborhood. And, you know, since I was very young, I knew that I was like moving into different neighborhoods because of just like racial demographics, right? Beyond racial demographics, you could feel these neighborhoods have different resources, right? Like, why is it that this Black neighborhood, at least where I live by, had very little small businesses, groceries, things that you just need to be able to live in community and ensure that you feel that there's food, that you feel safe, etc. And so for me, since very young, I started noticing those differences. And I've always been the type of person to ask why? Like, why do these conditions exist? Why is it that I live in the place that I do? Why is it that it feels like my neighborhood has a little bit more resources than this Black neighborhood? However, very different from like this experience that this white neighborhood looks like, right? And so I don't know. So for me, that's this curiosity and wanting to understand like why do we live in these realities has always helped me sort of like examine like not only our realities, but also the type of practices in place to make it a reality, right? Um, I've also, you know, beyond asking questions, I've also been very action oriented. I'm like, I just can't observe this. Like, I want to do something about it, right? And so for me, that meant I studied public policy as an undergraduate, knowing that policy has a big effect on people's lives, right? And I wanted to be on the resourcing side, right? Like we have amazing ideas in our society, and also it takes money to like do good work, right? And so for me, it was really important to be on the resourcing side of amazing work, working with incredible people. And so in my own fundraising, similar, you know, similar to a lot of us, I think, I also grew up with like learning how to fundraise through sort of like donor centrism. So kind of similar to what you're saying, Hannah, Claire, around like reacting to sometimes like money that is coming to community and adjusting sort of our programming to respond to money coming our way versus really internally thinking through like, hey, based on our goals, our needs, our strategies, does this funding actually support that? So I felt that very early on as well, like tension with like, why are we reacting to money? Why money's amazing, but why are we reacting to it and constantly sort of like moving to make it work for funders, whether it's, you know, individual donors, even government, right? Like all types of funders. And so I that for me was really important to reflect on. Um, I I I felt that it was really important to like examine it with others, and actually practice fundraising in a way where we can center more of our community voices needs. And so when I came across, you know, CCF, it resonated with me entirely, right? Like I'm one that leads with a social justice, with social justice. I want to practice my values. And I know that addressing power dynamics is going to be a big part of this work. It's not money, the money is so important and it's a big form of power. However, the relationships and the power dynamics we're navigating are just as important, right? And so yeah, I've been practicing community-centric fundraising along with other, you know, frameworks that kind of help us examine like how can we resource the work where we can honor ourselves, right, as humans? Like, you know, yes, we work for organizations, etc., but like, how do I make sure I feel good about what I do in partnership with my organization that I feel like I'm really keeping my community's integrity sort of like along with me, right? And so constantly seeking like new approaches that are going to help me like live into my values, um, resource our work with justice and also love, right? Like at the end of the day, like I do this work for a love for humanity and wanting to alleviate the type of conditions that we're experiencing. So I'll leave it at that for now.
Beautiful. Thank you, Chantal. I'm really excited to dig in further around how you both have personally navigated those power dynamics when you're, starting to shift conversations and reflecting with people from different walks of life around how the work can be done better and in a deeper sense of community. And also how you, guide your clients to do so. So we will get into that. Thank you. Jake, I would love to hear your story, how you came to your community-centric fundraising practice.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, it's just so cool to be on this webinar with folks from all over the world, all over the country. I saw, I'm from Minnesota, so I saw someone up in Des Moines. I got stranded there on a road trip once. So saw some folks in Mexico, from Germany and all across California and the rest of the US. So that's awesome. So I grew up in the disability community. My sister's got disabilities. And so from a really, really young age, got involved in the nonprofit world because I was like, how do we make this world work for my family and for others around that, like the systems we've built aren't necessarily built for them. And so my nonprofit kind of programmatic journey looked like disability advocacy, working in after school programming, eventually went international and had a lot of different projects there. And so I saw like over and over again on the programmatic end, how our programming didn't always respond to the community needs. So a couple examples, when I was working in the after school program in Chicago, we were serving the kids who had the highest need and didn't have much resources for after school. And as funding pressures came, we were pressured to get more and more students in the classroom. And so we were doing outreach, we were expanding our classrooms. And what was happening was the need to these kids who really had it was decreasing as we expanded. But we were doing that because our donors wanted to see more numbers, right, of kids served, even though that wasn't really what our goal was. That wasn't really what the community's need was. These other kids had the resources. There was a huge discrepancy within the classroom. And so what was happening over time is we're like, well, we have to forget about these kids who the whole program was intended to serve if we want to keep our funding and expand the funding there. So, and then another example in Argentina, I was working for like a pre-K program that was also like comedor, like a food. We gave lunch to kids. And so we fed over 100 kids each day that would come from the community. And then one day donors decided, the problem wasn't actually access, it was education. And so they were like, the funding became for educational programs. So now we're doing additional programs, and we'd have community members come up to us and say, how am I supposed to cook better when I have nothing to eat? And like that really stuck with me. And I was like, I loved working in the community and like working alongside folks, but I also felt this responsibility to understand how does this funding work? Like kind of like the Wizard of Oz, like peek behind the curtain. And so I took a job at Arabelle Advisors, which is a kind of philanthropic intermediary consultancy firm. And so I really had this role as this like front row seat to philanthropy. And when I started there, I came in with this total bias against funders. I'm like, oh, funders just don't get it. They're the problem. And what I found though in the role was like, because as an intermediary, we were both getting funds and giving them. And so when I was acting as a funder, I could build really strong funding relationships with other funders as peers. And then I could really understand like, what are their needs? What is their desire? Why are they operating the way they're operating? And it began to make more sense to me. But then at the same time, I could be acting as a nonprofit or a grantee or a nonprofit, and I could build really strong one-on-one relationships with other grantees and community members and understand where they're coming from and their needs and perspectives. And so I became somewhat of this translator between the two worlds. But what I was finding is the moment funders and nonprofits were in the same space, the whole conversation changed. Right? It's that meeting after the meeting you have with your colleagues at the water cooler, at the parking lot. there was so much that wasn't being said in these shared spaces, yet I kind of found like I confronted my bias and realized actually most folks that work in this sector wake up every day thinking they're doing the best they can for their work, right? Yet there was these huge breakdowns, and there's like all these survival mechanisms that we've created to maintain kind of some of our organizational longevity, our own jobs, and these different things. So I in this role, I also then like began to look at my own position and my own, like, how am I perpetuating these things? And so like one example stands out to me. We were doing a participatory grant making project, and the goal of this project was like economic environmental justice around the country. And so our goal was to get funding to communities who have been historically underfunded. And so to do this, we were like, okay, well, we want to make sure that our grantees really understand how to go through our whole application process. So we hosted this webinar where we're walking them through like, this is how you log onto the portal, like super nitty-gritty details. We'd set up this whole process. Well, things got delayed. We're about to launch, and it was like 3 days before, and we hadn't publicized this webinar to our grantees. And our team was like, well, we can't switch the date because that'll make us look bad to our funders. And I had to own right there, and I was part of that. I was part of that decision. I didn't push back at the time. And I was like, I had to own that the whole purpose for doing this project is to get funding to folks. And at the same time, this whole resource we're creating, all this time and energy spent was going to be missed out on. We weren't actually going to get the folks in the room to do the webinar because we didn't want to look bad to our grantee or to our funders. And so when I look at CCF and this framework, to me, it's really, it's a helpful framework for me to reflect on like, what is my role within the sector and my work. And so when I look at the 10 principles, they're not my 10 commandments. They're not the things that are like, oh, these are the always must have, but they're really guideposts, and they're chances for me to like hold up a mirror for myself to figure out, how am I working? Like, what's my role within this, and start beginning to question some of these things. So since my time at Arabella, I since left philanthropy, and I now, as like a full-time practitioner, and work in conflict management and resolution. And this is largely based on that experience, because I kind of kept thinking this whole time I was trying to push different systems in philanthropy, like this would be really a lot easier if we could just talk to one another. As funders, as grantees, and across different relationships too, right? As different fundraisers from different organizations. There's so many dynamics there. What would it be like to cut through some of this? So now I focus on conflict management and resolution. I take practices from the peace building field to help different communities, different organizations, both within philanthropy and just kind of in the community and governments and other spaces to work through some of these things. And so last thing I'll say here is, as part of my research within that field, I looked at like, what makes a good team? Like, what are the things, funders and nonprofits, we're supposed to be on the same team, right? We have the same goals. Like, what makes a good team? And this concept of psychological safety came up. You likely have heard of it, or maybe you have, maybe you haven't. But really, it's the idea to like question norms, to give feedback, to speak up, to ask questions without the fear of negative consequences. And when I dove into this, and it's really the number one indicator of an effective team, of teams that achieve success. And I looked at our sector and I'm like, there's not any psychological safety here. And so much of it's because of the power dynamic within money. But we also all own a role in perpetuating that and how we're working together, and like so many of our protective practices and organizations. And so it's really helping me kind of admit to myself is like, if we're not owning our role within this, we're accepting subpar work. And to me, like, that's just unacceptable. And it goes back to like where I started with my family and my sister, is like, if I accept that, that's accepting like, sorry, like this world's just not going to work for you if we can't get past this. So when I looked at CCF as this framework, it really is like a challenge to me to continue to reflect on my practices, and to create spaces where we can give each other feedback and be real and be honest, and really question some of the practices we're looking at.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jake. Thank you. Claire, I want to invite you to share with us how you came to I'm going to add an extra layer to the question for you. I'd like to specifically hear a little bit about how you came to CCF, but also how you started to implement more community-centric fundraising practices at your organization, Olivewood Gardens.
Yeah, sure thing. Thank you. I definitely relate to much of what's been said so far. I also kind of came into fundraising with some pretty traditional practices. I work at a really place-based organization that does food and environmental related work. And I'll say that I think I had the benefit of coming into a small organization, small and young organization. So a lot of our practices were still kind of being formed. Our development team was a team of one. And so I kind of had some leeway as I grew into the role and over time to really identify what was going on and to make changes. And so I definitely understand that in smaller versus larger teams, you know, we have different types of leeway to make these decisions. But over several, woo, the balloons go off. So over, excuse me, several years, I really started to notice a few different things going on in our sector and in the ways that we fundraise that just kind of felt misaligned. And I've always been, you know, similar to what Chantel shared, I've always been kind of a learner and wanting to really have a critical analysis of why are we doing the things that we're doing, and does it have to be this way? So to really challenge some of the assumptions that we have in our work around the status quo. You know, we still have the same issues that we've been trying to solve for, you know, 50 years ago, we're still trying to solve for. And so that really started to make me question, is what we're doing really working? And what are the core issues that are just kind of perpetuating? We just kind of feel like we're on this rat race. So I'll kind of share a few things that I started to notice along the way. One of those things which has been talked about is uplifting, you know, the needs of donors over the needs of communities. And so sometimes that looked like having really high maintenance donors or sponsors for events who took a lot of team capacity, you know, wanted to have things just so. And it really meant that our time was moved towards, you know, meeting the donors' desires, and rather than creating a really high quality program that was impactful and met the needs of our community. And so having experienced this over a few years, I definitely started to question, like, why is this what we do? Why am I the concierge to this donor and making sure that, you know, they feel comfortable and they have everything they need, when really this program is for our community? So that definitely was something that came out to, you know, kind of came up to me in my journey. Something else I started to notice was our annual fundraiser was mostly made up of wealthy white donors. And the folks who were volunteering at the event were our community members who were primarily people of color. And so there was this dynamic within events where we had people of color serving white wealthy donors, sitting at the tables, and oftentimes experiencing, you know, some negative commentary towards our volunteers. And so we started to feel like, whoa, this is really misaligned with how we want our community to feel. Our community is why we exist, and our donors shouldn't have the leeway to talk down to, or, you know, use their power and wield that kind of as a weapon over community members. So that definitely felt icky. And it was about kind of continuing to build our relationships with community, that folks started to have the confidence to actually say something about it and say that was happening. Kind of along those lines is that perpetuation of white tourism and poverty tourism, you know, kind of seeing how the language that we, you know, we're sometimes using in our messaging and our newsletter was kind of talking about, you know, kind of saying, oh, well, our community is experiencing all these, you know, challenges without you, you know, savior. we can't solve these. And so that also kind of felt like, we're in our language, we're perpetuating these dynamics. We perpetuate racism, we perpetuate sexism, we perpetuate all of these things within the language that we're using, which is totally contradictory to the work that we're trying to do. In a food justice organization, we want our community to thrive, to have access to fresh, nutritious food that they have control over. And so then to have this narrative on the other side that's kind of contradictory to this, really felt misaligned. Another concept that I'm actually seeing resurface right now is that of dating our donors, which is like, whoa, whoa, there's a lot of sexual harassment that happens in our sector, particularly, to fundraisers. And so, this concept, it perpetuates this dynamic within many, female, in particular, there's a lot of female fundraisers, perpetuates this kind of problematic dynamic. And so that language that we're using to say, yeah, we have to cater to their needs, can just perpetuate these really negative outcomes. Another thing I noticed in my grant writing was kind of this putting the onus of systems level issues on community members. So saying, well, our community members are making poor dietary choices. Well, as Jake mentioned, if there's not access to fresh food that is affordable, that is culturally relevant, if there's all these other environmental and policy and systems issues that are occurring that prevent people from being able to make nutritious food choices, how can we put that onus on community members? And so I started to see the need to push that back towards the systems and really talk about our community's resilience in the face of all of this history of environmental racism, social inequities, and things like that. So as I, kind of started to experience all these things and have conversations with other fundraisers in San Diego, I really started to see that I wasn't the only one, feeling this, experiencing this. As I mentioned, Vu Le was, really impactful in my journey. I started to listen to the Ethical Rainmaker, and these folks really started to give kind of ideas of how we might reimagine the work that we're doing, and to really challenge this notion that this is the way that we resource our work. It doesn't have to be this way. And so I started to look at in community at how we fundraise with this lens again of moving charity towards justice, and really thinking about how we do this work in a way that aligns with both my personal values and also my organizational values. So some examples of how we've started to practice this at Olivewood. A few things that I mentioned were like our fundraiser. So we totally changed the way that we have our fundraiser. We used to have a sit-down dinner that really kind of had this service aspect to it. It's now kind of hard to explain without y'all being here, but we have a large property. We really expanded it. So there's less of the service. There's no longer this sit down dinner where donors are being served. We've created a sliding scale ticketing model so that folks of all different means are able to participate. One thing that has always felt kind of weird is, why is it that our community can't participate in our events? That just feels wrong. And so now we have this really beautiful community-oriented event where folks are from all means are able to participate in the full event. And we actually gotten a lot of feedback from all of our folks that they can feel the love. And so even this concept that, there's this concept of risk in how we change, how we might change our practices, oh gosh, what could happen? Well, what we're hearing is that people see the changes and that it feels good. We want to feel good in the work that we're doing. And so that also included how we're messaging, our messaging and marketing to community. how we're writing our grant applications, like I mentioned, putting that onus on putting the onus on the systems. We've also done a lot of learning, and so that's included learning with our staff and our board around community-centric fundraising. So Chantel and Masaya have come actually to do a training with us. We center all of our development meetings around the principles, and it's an expectation that our staff, our development team staff, are learning about community-centric fundraising. And we're also, I think psychological safety is really important here. Is in our team, we're really focused on building a space where we're able to have these critical and sometimes challenging conversations where we're kind of pushing back on expectations that maybe are coming our way from donors, or there may be proposed partnerships that might not be aligned with our work and our values. And sometimes in the sector, we're moving so fast that we forget to ask these questions. So we do a lot of slowing down and asking, does this make sense? Does this program, does this partnership make sense for our community? I could keep going on, but for now, I'm gonna pause and and let us move on.
Really fantastic. Thank you so much, Claire, for giving so many concrete examples of the challenges that you sought to overcome and the solutions that you've developed at Olive Wood Gardens. Brian is already on top of it. I wanted to take a breath because we all just took in a lot of really incredible information from our three panelists, and invite you to share any thoughts you're having as you reflect on what's happening in your own organizations. If you've already put into practice some community-centric fundraising practices that are working and you want your peers to know about them, go ahead and drop them in the chat. We are recording this webinar, but the chat is not being recorded. So I really encourage you to use that as a space to engage with one another. You can also share concerns. What's a challenge that you're having with perhaps your donor community, with some of your funders, conversations you want to have, but you don't know where to get started. Those are all things that can be really helpful to kind of uplift today. And you may just find good thought partners, both in our panelists and in the chat. So I want to just kind of invite a little bit of conversation there. Wonderful. Okay, so I think, Claire, you just touched on so many good points around the solutions that you've come to adopt and what it feels like for your community. And I found myself getting really excited. And I'm wondering if we can dig in a little bit about how we create those spaces for collaboration, how we get to psychological safety if we're not there already. And I want to invite Jake first, because I know you've got a lot of experience working closely both with funders, community-based nonprofits. You're now doing this really awesome work that's kind of steeped in peacemaking practices. So can you tell us a little bit about how you apply CCF principles to create these spaces for collaboration, and how our attendees might be able to adopt some of those practices?
Yeah, it's a good question. So in my work, I bring together funders and executive directors, fundraisers, leaders, and organizations on both sides to really create spaces where they can reflect on their work, be honest with one another, share their stories, and imagine new solutions as teammates collectively in doing that. So one example is something like I'll give you a specific example that came up in Tulsa, Oklahoma, with some of the work we're doing, which is where funders got together and nonprofits got together in the same room. We did like a separate space, and they talked about the different challenges they have to building trust with the other and building these relationships. And one of the things that emerged was the norm in Tulsa where funders expected, or the expectation was, that fundraisers would travel to funders for their fundraising meetings. And fundraisers were like, this is making us feel inferior. This is like counterproductive. It's like a pain for us to get there. And yet there was like this individual risk to bring that up, because like nobody wanted to be the one fundraiser who didn't show up to the meeting because everyone else was going there. But what we do is we create these group spaces to like talk about these norms, reflect on them. And so then they were able to share as a group, like, hey, can we talk about this? Like, this is an issue. And what happened, which was really cool, is once that was on the table, funders too were going, oh my God, I would have loved to come visit you, but I didn't want to impose. And this was always the norm. I thought this. So it was this unbroached topic that both sides felt risk and uncomfort in like bringing up. But then once it was on the table, the group could kind of collectively reimagine, okay, well, what makes the most sense here? And some of the funders were like, yo, I would love to come see. I would love to be there. I'd love to be in community with you all. And other ones were like, the reality is I've got 2,000 grantees, we're a corporate funder, and like we don't have any time or space for that. And so like, but then they're like, well, we actually don't even need these kind of meetings. Like we don't need to do that. And so the point wasn't that like, oh, we found the solution. The point was that we open the door to be able to renegotiate the solution for what worked best for that specific community, those specific relationships. And so part of what I do is to create those spaces that mitigate some of that risk, and take the onus off the individuals, and then to really look at collectively how we're working. But a lot of those things I think can be applied at the individual level. A lot of the research on like feedback, for example, shows that we fear negative consequences of feedback way more than it's actually real. And giving feedback can be one of the best ways to build trust. And so I think having open like curiosity towards some of that can be really, really helpful, and like kind of leading with curiosity, but also just like asking the question. If you're a fundraiser and you're like, oh my God, I could never do that. I could never tell my funder I'm not going to meet them. Maybe you just ask the question like, hey, how are these fundraising meetings working for us together? And so that's one specific example, but really even just like talking about how you're working together can kind of really help there. And so this kind of what we've been talking about peripherally here is this principle 6, which is like we treat donors as partners. And so much of that is like, okay, how would you treat any other partner? And so just looking at like, how do you work with your other teammates? What does that really look like? And then looking at your own behavior, because it's really easy to look at the donor's behavior and be like, well, they're doing this, or doing this, or doing that. But really turn it back to yourself and asking like, okay, well, what am I doing? Am I giving honest feedback? Am I actually sharing the challenges in this work? Am I being curious about some of their challenges? So those are some of the. I'll leave it there for now. That's some thoughts that sparked when you asked the question.
Great, thank you, Jake. Chantel, would you like to add anything in your experience working with your clients? Both in how do we create these safe spaces for collaboration? But I'm also interested if you could provide some specific examples around engaging the full community. So just beyond the conversation of how we deal with our donors, make them feel like partners rather than parents. What about the rest of the community? How can we bring everyone in?
How can we bring everyone in when we're trying to have challenging conversations with funders? Or just to clarify for me, so that is that the question, Hannah?
Yeah, really sort of, let's say we're starting from zero, right? Like we're here today in this webinar because we want to learn more about community-centric fundraising. We're reflecting and realizing that there are some challenges that we need to address. How do we create a space to even start addressing those challenges?
Yeah, I mean, this is what I go back to. At the end of the day, I'm a true believer that like your individual beliefs are going to influence your actions, right? Like how you think of the world, of yourself, of people in your team, your community, your sort of like just the nonprofit philanthropic landscape. Like our mental modes are actually the most powerful like places to start, right? And so talking about psychological safety, like are you giving yourself permission to examine, reflect? Are you taking the time to like, wait, I just experienced this moment, this interaction. Let me give myself a moment to actually process that. And then from there, can I take it, if it right, to another colleague and name like, hey, this felt uncomfortable. Maybe I don't have all the vocabulary to articulate like that discomfort, but like it takes a little courage to even name that you're uncomfortable, right? And so I do think it's part of just those moments of like, I don't know, right? Maybe y'all think a little differently, but I do think it takes a little bit of courage to say like, hey, this doesn't feel good. This feels uncomfortable. And then to bring it back to more people, right? And so in a way, to your question of like, how do you get community in? Well, it starts with us. It starts with us, right? And being able to be like, hey, are you feeling this? Because I'm feeling it. And then from there, right? Like, what sort of practices, systems do you have within your own team, within your organization to give it more space, right? I've seen that depending on like, right, what stage you are in that, where you get more the reality is if you get more voices, community members involved, it's more time consuming, it's more laborious, but the reality is it can be way more rewarding and you can practice your values. And so I think we also have to make that decision on like who is part of that community, how be realistic about like the journey and the time and the emotional resilience also needed to be in community, right? Because it's not just like our own emotions that we're dealing with. Now we're dealing with all of us here, right? And so I don't know. I mean, that's just a little bit, and maybe if you want something more specific, Hannah, but I just want to like uplift, like it starts with like our own thinking. So like what we're saying on like how are we reflecting on our own practices? And can you take that and share that with another colleague and sort of expand that community so that we have this conversation collectively, right?
Yeah. When I hear you talk about reflection and how being in community is more laborious, both the time commitment, the emotional commitment, I imagine that, a lot of nonprofit leaders just kind of, I know that in my practice, I've worked with organizations where the leaders are like, we just don't have time. And I know that it's come down to having, the beauty of being a consultant, just, total transparency, is that I get to say things that I never felt empowered to say as a staff member, right? So as a staff member, I had the fear of, I didn't have psychological safety completely, right? I was concerned that I would be let go, whether the decision came from a senior executive or a board member, right? As a consultant, I'm able to say, when you throw your hands up and say, we just don't have time for this, I offer back to you, do you really want to change the systems that you say you want to change? Because that might be the kind of the investment you need to make to actually, tip the scales. So it's how do you navigate those conversations, Chantel? Do people find your practice because they're already there? Are there any kind of I don't know, any kind of tips you have for folks who are just sort of getting into that mind space of like, we may need to do things differently?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, right? Like myself included, we're all in different parts of this journey, right? And I do think it takes all of us to like, and it's hard to practice this, I'll admit it. Like, how can we support each other given like we are in different parts of this journey? But there's a commitment to each other's sort of journey because like we're a part of like this full picture of like we're all trying to change these systems. We're trying to like achieve more justice. We're trying to achieve more, et cetera, right? But yeah, for folks who are like, I mean, I'll be super, super honest. Like some folks are like, when they're like, oh, fundraising consulting firm, they're like, oh, cool. Are you going to help us bring in money? Right? Like that's a huge motivation for folks. And then we're like, yes, and we want to practice this way of fundraising using your values. So like, let's take the time to identify what are your values, right? That are guiding your organization, your fundraising. Let's reflect on that, right? Because yes, we can totally raise money, but what feels most important long-term for the impact the sector is that we're doing it with our values. We're doing it by centering our community. We're doing it by reflecting, examining, challenging ourselves. I mean, just so many, and also like learning the power dynamic. Sometimes people feel like, why am I not raising money? Right? And it's like, there's a lot of power dynamics. There are practices in place where like you have to be the loudest, you know, in the field so that more people are seeing you, hearing you. And it's like, is that the practice that we actually want, right? That like whoever has the most sort of marketing efforts actually gets the most money if we're really thinking about problem solving a lot of the issues in our communities, right? And so like, do you feel like, can I like challenge you and be like, what is your personality? What are your strengths? How can you lead with that instead of like replicating maybe some of the things that we're seeing in the sector that are problematic, right? Is like, it shouldn't be that like, you know, marketing, all the money that goes into marketing is what is going to help bring in money, right? And so, yeah, there's just a couple of things. And you know, generally people, we're learning with them. It's a mutual relationship, right? Like we're learning about them, we're learning how they do things, and they're learning as well. So I think beyond like fundraising is we're learning what we want to do differently. Even the smallest shift can go a really long way. I think a big one that we practice is oftentimes executive directors, development teams hold a lot of the fundraising power, right, in our organizations. How can we build a culture of collective fundraising that includes our entire community, which of course includes donors, but like, right, like we're all resourcing this work and we all have a little bit of a different role to do that. But, you know, even changing those dynamics within our organizations, right? It's like, can we share the burden? Because the burden is to be shared, right?
Yeah, yeah, beautifully said. Jake, did you have some thoughts around specific tools that you've used when you're having these conversations around making shifts?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're reflecting back to the original poll we had. What interests the challenge, the one that was resonating with folks, is having these difficult conversations, right? And I think even if you've never heard of CCF, community-centric fundraising, you're probably like, oh yeah, there's a bunch of crap that I wish I could tell somebody else, or that I had these tough conversations. And so I want to just give you all like a little one tool that can be really, really helpful, which is like, and we use this a lot in the kind of conflict resolution space, which is really the underlying needs. So if we think about like these conversations or these issues or these challenges as like a tree, everything above ground are the things that we think we're solving. So this is how are we doing our fundraising gala each year? How are we using the example I shared earlier, like fundraising meetings, like how are we setting these meetings up? And if we're just trying to solve that meeting, like we're kind of stuck to like whatever the manifest problem is of like, should I go to them or should they come to us for a fundraising meeting? But the invitation here is to actually look at, like, if we think about what's underneath the surface, the part you don't see, which is like the roots, that's like the underlying needs of the different parties. So that would be like asking in this example, like, why are we having a fundraising meeting in the first place? And the needs that you might have as an executive director, as a fundraiser, might be really different than the funder. And the reality is if you're working with 4, 5, 6 different funders, the reason they're having that meeting with you could be really different. One of them could be accountability. They're like, you know what? We just want to know where our money's going. The other one could be like, we really want to help. The other one could be like, hey, we're putting together a huge coalition and we want to have a best understanding. The reality is we don't know. And so the invitation is, when you think about like, oh, this is a challenging conversation, is do you really understand like the purpose behind the practice? And so that's what's like trying to figure out the why. And the easiest way you can get there is by asking, right? Is just really asking like, okay, yeah, can we talk about our funder meetings? Like what is important for you? What's working, what's not? And what is the thing you're really trying to get at? Because once we do that, then if we start from a place of our underlying needs, the options and the solutions are expanded. Now we have like so many more options of how to move forward at our disposal. And the reality is too, is oftentimes we as practitioners don't understand our why. Like, I'll tell you, I think back when I was working, we wanted to launch a new fund, and it was like from scratch, these donors came together. They're like, we need to start a foundation. and we're the expert consultants, right? And we looked at each other, and I asked, the head person in charge, what should we do? They're like, well, go look at the website of 5 other foundations and then make the thing off that. So if our practices are just copy paste from everywhere else, like we're often getting this game of just perpetuating what's already there and assuming that's the best practice. And so the question I would always ask myself is like, why am I doing this? Like, what is the underlying need? What is the real reason that we even have this thing, that we're doing this thing? And then how can we start there? And then also understand the needs of our different partners. And so the same thing could be for community, right? Like how often, I mean, everyone has probably seen it, us as nonprofit organizations assuming the needs of our communities too, right? Is like, what is it like to really ask and understand the underlying need? And so the disclaimer here too is sometimes we don't even know for ourselves, and sometimes our partners don't know. Your funder might not know why they're having a meeting with you. They might be a program officer, and that's just what the person did before them, so they're doing it too. And so if you can really understand where's this needs coming from, your options open up. So that's one way to think about this, is just, and the best like tagline I could say to take away here is like curiosity. How can you be curious? And so how do you get to the underlying needs if you feel like you're stuck up here, is just ask why. Well, why that? You might say like, why? Well, I need better communication. Well, why? What's underneath that? Well, when I communicate, I feel respected. Okay, maybe my underlying need here is respect, or is inclusion, or is uplifting these. And that can kind of get back to some of the values that Chantel was talking about. How do you get away from the practices and move past that to center the values, which opens up the possibility for more options for practice?
Yeah, that's such great advice. Yeah, I find myself repeating similarly, respectful curiosity is always appropriate. I say that to my clients a lot because, when you're working with folks who are leading development and nose to the grindstone, trying to get the operating budget covered, we'll find ourselves jumping through hoops and we don't know why. And when you take the space to say, what is the purpose behind this process? Oftentimes folks are like, I don't know, just because it's always been this way, right? So I love that. Look, curiosity. When in doubt, curiosity. Ask good questions. Claire, I wanted to, along those same lines, you gave some really great examples of how the shifts that you've started to make at Olivewood Gardens. And I'm just interested in hearing a little bit more about how you effectively engaged, your fundraising team, your staff, your board members, your donors, the community of folks that your programs are in service of every day. Like, can you give us a little bit more meat around, how you sought out what everyone needed, where the, curiosity started up from, how it evolved, like what else you'd like to share with us about that process?
Sure thing. There's definitely a lot there, and it's been a journey. And I think that both Chantel and Jake have kind of uplifted something that's really important. And there's actually conversations of an 11th principle, which is around the importance of doing our own personal and institutional work. And so if we're not doing our own work, if we're not doing our own work within our organizations, how can we possibly do that work in our community? So if anyone's a Adrienne Marie Brown fan, I'm a big fan. She has the book Emergent Strategy, and she talks about fractals, and which is kind of the smallest part of things that create patterns. And so when we think about the patterns that we're perpetuating, we need to be doing it first on our own. So if I say I want to practice social justice, what am I doing personally to practice and advance social justice? And then what's my organization doing to practice and advance social justice? I can't expect the largest institutions and processes to be doing that if we're not doing it ourselves. So the way that we do our work is critical to creating the world that we're hoping to see. And so we've done a lot of internal work. And so that really has started with our staff team. Our development team has done a lot of work around community-centric fundraising. Of course, there are challenges with, fundraising is a high burnout high burnout sector. And so that's also something that we're looking at is if we're not practicing values that are aligned with individuals in our organization, we're going to lose people. And so part of what we have incorporated into our interviewing process as we're onboarding new folks for our development team and our other teams. Woo! I'm saying so many exciting things today. It's great. But one thing, excuse me, is we add a question around community-centric fundraising and, to get a sense of people's understanding of community-centric fundraising, what that means for our practice. We share that with folks ahead of time so they have the opportunity to dive into it a little bit more, and then we can really understand how committed people are to doing this work. So that's just one small little thing we've added in as our team is growing to make sure that folks that are coming into our organization are aligned and also are really open to learning. I think that's the biggest thing is the curiosity and being open to asking why and to trying new things. So as our team has worked on, our own personal and organizational growth, we've also done that work in collaboration with our board. And so that means that at our board meetings, every board meeting, I'm sharing about community-centric fundraising and what Olivewood is doing to practice this and show it. So I'm always uplifting the different decisions that we're making that are in alignment with community-centric fundraising. That means sometimes having, challenging conversations with board members who feel nervous. It's common for folks to feel nervous that practicing something different means that we're losing resources. So there is a little bit of a misconception, I think, around community-centric fundraising, and that it means that we're just not going to ask for money anymore, and we're just going to hope, it all comes to us. That's not what we're saying. We're really talking about how do we just do this differently? If what we've done in the past hasn't created the changes we're looking for, how can we do this differently? And it doesn't have to mean that we're burning down all of our relationships. It's just like, how are we in relationship with people? So then that does mean in our conversations with our donors, sometimes we have to push back on folks if they are asking for changes in programming or asking for things that are really not quite in alignment with how we want to practice our work. So one really specific example, we're in the middle of a capital campaign. Historically, capital campaigns mean naming rights. So that means somebody is paying to get their name on a building. And we're a garden in a community, we're a community center. We have all types of folks coming through our programming every day. We don't have names on things. And that feels transactional to us. And it also doesn't acknowledge all the different types of labor and support that has come in to create, this future, hopefully new commercial kitchen. It's not in alignment to have so-and-so's kitchen on there when, that doesn't take into account, all the different people that were involved in making that a reality. So that's a conversation we've had with people, is to say, we really appreciate, your interest in supporting this campaign. However, we've chosen not to include naming rights for anyone. We will have a supporter, some sort of supporter wall or like a rotating slideshow, and that's going to include donors, but it's also going to include volunteers and partners who were critical in our programming. And so that also means looking at how we're acknowledging supporters. So, we're not just acknowledging our donors and uplifting all the things that our donors do. We're also uplifting the things that our volunteers and partners are doing. So another kind of tangible thing that we've done is started to do supporter appreciation events. So in the past, we'd had, really donor specific. Well, now everyone who's a part of our community is invited to come. And we've also gotten a lot of really great feedback on the opportunities people are having to connect with people who are involved with the Olivewood community in all different ways. And so, it does feel scary, and people feel the love. People want to be involved because because we can feel how this is, and it feels good. And so that's also something when I do get pushback from folks is like, well, how does it feel? And like, this is the feedback that we're getting, is that people are on board with how we're doing our work, how we've shifted our messaging and our models. So it is all about, it's a lot about building that trust to have critical conversations. And so our team, I've done a lot of work, our team has done a lot of work around, trust building, and we're continually doing this work. And so I would say that's a really important part of, creating these changes within our organizations.
Yeah, thank you so much. Eye-opening and fills me with hope. And one thought I was having while you were sharing some examples, and this also came up for me earlier when Chantal was speaking, is there isn't a right and wrong. This is a journey, right? And it's near impossible to change these structures and the way we've done things for generations overnight. But making these incremental changes is what really gets us to a very different, more equitable, inclusive place. So thank you so much to this panel for sharing your experience and your expertise. We've got about 12 minutes left. So I want to open up the floor for Q&A from the audience. We did get one in the chat that was, what advice or tips would you give to someone starting with no prior knowledge of fundraising? So, sorry, go ahead, Jake.
Well, I was gonna say, last night I met with a friend who just took a job, and she's new to fundraising. It's with an international NGO, and she's just like, Jake, what's going on? This is weird. And she's like, I'm like intimidated. Can you tell me tell me everything you know, basically? And I said, no, like your perspective is way better than mine because you're coming with fresh eyes. And when you see something that doesn't feel right, ask questions. And so that would be my recommendation, is just like ask questions and really get to understand why, rather than like looking around and figuring out how everyone else is do it to copy and paste, because your fresh eyes and that fresh perspective are probably going to be really, really, really valuable. And so building strong, trusting relationships where you feel comfortable to like ask those questions, and put it on the table, because yeah, it's hard not to get socialized into the way of doing things. And so your perspective is super valuable. It's a great position to be in.
Nice. Thank you. Chantal, any thoughts, anything you would add?
Yeah, going back to sort of our learning theme is, just expose yourself to different ways of fundraising. However, like beyond but examine, right? Like examine, like what do you see, what do you feel, what do you hear? Be also like be a strong observer of your own team, and the practices there, right? So I think like oftentimes when we're learning, we're intaking information. It's like beyond intake, like what else are you going to do with that information, right? And like who are you going to share sort of that space to help you kind of like examine together, right? So I would say, yes, there's things that you could do on your own, but like find colleagues that are going to help you be curious and to learn, right? And I think that in all of our teams, right, there's dynamics, people are busy, etc. But like you need to do this in partnership with other folks. And so like identify whether it's like on your own team or coming to this webinar, or in the future, like looking at other folks who are doing it in a way that resonates with you, like do it in partnership, so that like it just, it doesn't feel like you're alone in your ideas, right?
Absolutely. That peer network is vitally important. Okay, the next question we have is, what suggestions would you give to try to re-engage donors? So I know there's a lot of assumptions and questions that are probably coming up for us there, but
I can hop in. I think, yeah, I have more, I would ask more questions about if you're re-engaging means you have never engaged with these donors, or is it engaging with lapsed donors? I guess I would have more questions, but a few thoughts that come to mind are centering, we're centering community, so centering relationships. So if donors are partners in this work, I think there's a good opportunity, especially if you are new to the development team, there's a good opportunity to reach out to our supporters and say, hey, I'm the new, the new kid on the block. How can we have an opportunity to sit down together? I think, something that's important is to really understand what our supporters' motivations are. And I think that can help us to get an understanding of where people are on their journey. So when I think about practicing community-centric fundraising, I'm also thinking about, something that we've talked about in the San Diego CCF community is this idea of love, and love from like the bell hook sense of love as the extension of oneself for the spiritual growth of oneself or another. And so it's not like, oh, I love you, everything you do is great. It's like, I love you, and let's talk about the root causes of hunger. Let's talk about why this organization exists, and the real kind of, as Jake is talking about, what are the roots to the reason why we exist, and how can you as a donor start to think about how you're engaging in this conversation. And so I think there's an opportunity to help our supporters move along in their own journey of understanding the issues. So people may come, I think about Olivewood, people may come to us because they care a lot about nutrition and people eating nutritious food, or they care a lot about gardening, and people having access to food, but maybe they're not understanding that there's a lot of root causes around, environmental policy and systems. And so if you're starting here, okay, what sort of messaging can I be providing so that you can start moving along your journey? Or if we're, in conversation and you say something about, oh, well, people are making, poor decisions about their food. Oh, that's a great learning opportunity. Can I share, here in our community, there's neighborhoods that are considered food apartheid, where there's been a history of policies and systems and environmental decisions that mean that a lot of people don't have access to fresh food. And so that's actually it means that a lot of people don't have the choice over what they're eating. So I think there's a lot of relationship building, and then like seeking those opportunities to have meaningful conversations about, why we exist, why we're doing what we're doing. And that's, aligns with that social justice lens in fundraising. So I hope that was helpful, at least to start.
For sure, for sure.
Can I just add something in the
Yeah,
chat that I
please,
want to
feel
share
free.
very quickly? Right, related to what Claire's saying about like re-engaging donors through sort of a relationship building way. Also maybe encouraging us all, saying for me too, is like, and then what are the type of communications that are sort of like helping with that re-engaging? And maybe just like ask yourself, like, is this communication to like make my donor feel good, or is this communication, like to Claire's point, is like, yes, I want to feel good about this relationship, and also we need to talk about the things that we're trying to accomplish together, right? Like both things are possible. And so I just, in the chat, I added a link from a recent article on like how you can sort of be more expansive of your fundraising communications with some of these principles in mind.
Awesome. Thank you, Chantel. Jake?
Yeah, I just want to add like a quick like disclaimer, almost maybe is the right word, to some of this work. I think it's really, there can be a tendency when you think community centric, it's like we're moving away from the donor centric. Like, yeah, the donors are the bad guys, and like your job is like speak truth to power. And like while there are times where we have to like be bold and courageous, like the idea is really to recenter in like, why are we all doing this work, and owning our part. And so a big part of like the way I look at CCF is like, it's like a call to own how am I participating in this relationship and in this dynamic. And so then when it thinks about like engaging, so then to your question of like, how do you engage donors, is like share your own journey. Like, how are you grappling with this? What are you doing? And you can share that with your donors too. And so like Claire talked about this being a journey. It really is. Like every day I'm like, I'll realize something like, oh wow, I just got off that meeting. I realized I'm doing the exact thing I didn't want to be doing. Or like, this is like totally in the flies in the face of this. And so to me, the highest trust relationships I've built are ones where I've let people in on that process I'm going through. And so utilizing, I mean, a great way to start could just be like, yo, I just went to this webinar on CCF principles. I never heard of it. It's kind of weird. Can we like look at these together? Can we look at these principles? Can we like talk about that? Like I'm starting to question, like, why do we do this? And why do we do that? And so you don't have to have all the answers, right? And the best, I think for me, like the best approach is like through that vulnerability of your own journey is the best way to invite others into it, at least that I've found.
Awesome suggestion. Thank you. I want to encourage everyone to scroll back up and grab a bunch of those incredible resources that our panelists dropped in the chat for us. Jesse, if you wouldn't mind popping up our slides, I'm going to close this out. So call to action today. We hope that you will share at least one thing that you learned with someone in your community, especially if you found it challenging, even better, right? Share the journey, find your people, and you are invited by our panelists to connect with CCF San Diego Chapter. They have monthly meetings the last Thursday of the month at 3 o'clock, and we've got some contact information if you're interested in doing that. I'll give you a second to do any screen grabbing or quick jotting down of information. This presentation will also be available on Fundraising Academy's portal. And if you are looking for additional professional development, learning opportunities, or ways that you can continue to deepen your relationships in the fundraising sector, please check out Fundraising Academy's online learning portal. There's all kinds of good stuff there, including monthly webinars, live workshops. There are recordings, archives of great webinars just like this that you can reference, and all kinds of really good self-paced learning. So please check that out if you haven't already. And thank you. Thank you so much to our panelists, Chantel, Claire, and Jake, for being incredible thought leaders and partners in this journey. And San Diego is so lucky to have 3 of you. And I feel really blessed to be in your company today. So thank you for being such awesome experts and sharing your experience with everyone. And big thanks to Fundraising Academy for having me back. With that, we will wish everyone a really fantastic day and take good care.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.